The following is a DW Old Testament production. Abraham, Sarah, and Lot continued to make their way through Canaan, keeping to the central highlands that ran north to south. Behind them, to the west, lay the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon. To the east, in the Jordan Valley, were the other Canaanite cities, all of which owed nominal allegiance to Egypt, who controlled the region. At this time, Abraham and his tribe were no match against the Canaanites, who practiced more advanced warfare techniques with their bronze armor and weapons. Reaching Shechem, between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, God appeared to Abraham and reaffirmed his promise, stating, "To your descendants I will give this land." From Shechem, they made their way south to Bethel, a city that had been founded about 100 years earlier. On a ridge east of the city, the Hebrews established their camp, and Abraham built an altar. There, God appeared to him once more and again renewed his promise of land and prosperity. Abraham and his family probably stayed there for several months, letting their flocks feed on the grasses that grew around the many springs in the area. However, a famine soon swept through Canaan, and once again the patriarch packed up and headed south in search of water and pasturage. From Genesis 20:13, we learned that when he first set out from his father's house, an agreement had been made between him and Sarah that she was to pass as his sister, because, as he said, the fear of God was not among the nations with whom they would be brought in contact, and they might kill Abraham for his wife's sake. If she was looked upon as his sister of a mighty chief, her hand could be sought, and certain formalities would have to be gone through, giving Abraham time to escape with his wife. There is in the British Museum an ancient Egyptian papyrus, which, although of somewhat later date than that of Abraham, proves that his fears on entering Egypt were at least not groundless. It relates how Pharaoh, on the advice of his counselors, sent armies to take away a man's wife by force and then to murder her husband. Sarah was eventually taken into the house of the Pharaoh, but God intervened and struck the Pharaoh and his house with great plagues, which by and by led to the true identity of Sarah, probably by Sarah herself. Upon this, the king summoned Abraham, addressed him in words of reproach, sent him under guided escort to the border, and released him with all his possessions intact. When Abraham and Lot returned to Bethel some years later, they found their numbers so increased that the land there could no longer support them all. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, while Lot dwelt among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom, near what was then the southern end of the Dead Sea. Genesis 13:11. These cities of the valley, like the rest of Canaan at the time, were subdivided among a number of small kings, which each probably ruling over a city and the immediate surrounding neighborhood. From that time on, Lot's fortune dwindled. Not long after he settled in Sodom, an army led by a coalition of 4 chieftains, possibly seeking control of the copper mines in the area, captured and ransacked the cities of the southern shores of the Dead Sea. They took many prisoners, including Lot. When Abraham learned of the disaster, he assembled an army among his own people and pursued the enemy soldiers to the foothills of Laish, far to the north, and then east toward Damascus. After a night attack and battle, he rescued Lot, but further trouble lay ahead. Here, the striking story of Sodom and Gomorrah begins with God warning Abraham about the destruction of the 2 cities. Abraham pleads to God to spare the city, and an interesting dialogue develops where Abraham bargains with God to save the cities even if 10 righteous men are discovered. That not being the case, the cities are eventually destroyed by fire and brimstone. Being warned through his relationship with Abraham, Lot and his family are allowed to escape. However, Lot's wife, while fleeing the city, disregards a divine order not to look back at the city and becomes a pillar of salt. The exact location of the 2 cities has long intrigued biblical scholars. The dominant theory now places them under the southern waters of the Dead Sea. Geologic evidence indicates that some kind of cataclysm, probably an earthquake, occurred in this area during the early part of the 2nd millennium BC. The floor of the valley may have dropped abruptly and been submerged. Today, dead trees, encrusted with thick layers of salt, rise from the shallowed water. For a long time, Lot and his 2 daughters lived alone in a remote cave. In a startling scene, the 2 girls drug their father, sleep with him, and become pregnant in order to continue the family line. Born from this unholy union would be the birth of Israel's hereditary enemies, Moab and Ammon. Abraham, meanwhile, settled near Hebron, an unusually fertile area about 20 miles south of Jerusalem. There he was able to plant crops of barley and wheat in the fields beyond the camp. It was at this time that God appeared to Abraham in a vision, renaming him and Sarah to their full titles and establishing the covenant sign of circumcision. Abram means the father of elevation or noble chief. Abraham means the father of a multitude. Sarai means the princely, and Sarah means the princess. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Genesis 17:13. For the first time did Abraham see God as the smoking furnace and the burning lamp. The divine brightness enwrapped in a cloud, just as Moses saw it in the bush, and the children of Israel on their wilderness march, and as it afterwards dwelt in the sanctuary above the mercy seat and between the cherubim and the ark of the covenant. This was the first vision sent to Abraham, the first stage of the covenant into which God entered with him, and the first appearance of the glory of God. Precious as the promise of God to Abraham had been, it still left one point undetermined: who the mother of the promised seed was to be.